You know what people say about spiritual burnout? Just push through, pray harder, read more, trust God. If your faith was stronger, you wouldn't feel this way. That sounds spiritual. It isn't helpful, because the most burned out man in the entire Bible wasn't a man of weak faith. He was the mightiest prophet who ever lived, and the moment he collapsed, he had just performed the greatest miracle of his life. That's the part nobody talks about. Let's go into it. Who was this man? His name was Elijah. Before we get to the breakdown, understand who he was. He wasn't a priest, not a king, not someone with institutional power. He was a man from a small town called Tishbe, the middle of nowhere. And yet, God used him to shut the sky. He walked up to King Ahab, the most powerful man in Israel, and told him directly, "No rain, no dew, not until I say so." Then he vanished, and the drought came, exactly like he said, for 3.5 years. During that drought, Jezebel went to work. You need to understand who Jezebel was. She was a Phoenician princess, daughter of a priest king. She married Ahab and brought her gods with her. She built a temple to Baal in Samaria. She installed 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah. She funded them from the royal treasury. And then she started killing. She systematically hunted down the prophets of God, had them executed, one by one. The prophets of Israel went underground. One man hid 100 of them in caves just to keep them alive. This was the world Elijah operated in. Not a comfortable religious environment, a war zone. And he was still standing, still speaking, still the last man on his feet. That was Elijah. Before all of this, before the tree, the mountain. 3.5 years into the drought, God told Elijah to go back. He walked back into the open, and he did something that should have gotten him killed immediately. He challenged 450 prophets of Baal to a public contest on Mount Carmel, in front of King Ahab, in front of all Israel. 2 altars, 2 sacrifices. One condition: whoever's God sends fire, he is the true God. The Baal prophets went first. They prayed from morning until noon, nothing. They danced, they shouted louder, still nothing. And Elijah, the text says, mocked them. He said, "Maybe your God is thinking about something else. Maybe he's traveling. Maybe he's asleep and needs to be woken up." They cut themselves with swords until the blood ran. All afternoon, still nothing. Then it was Elijah's turn. And here's what most people miss. He didn't just set up his altar and pray. He dug a trench around it, had 12 jars of water poured over the sacrifice. 12 jars during a 3-year drought. He poured out precious water 3 times until the sacrifice was soaked and the trench overflowed. He was making it impossible. Deliberately. No human fire was going to burn a water-drenched sacrifice. And then Elijah prayed. Not a long prayer, simple and direct. Fire fell from heaven, not just on the sacrifice, on the wood, the stones, the dust. It licked up the water in the trench. The entire nation fell on their faces. The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. The prophets of Baal were seized and executed. The drought broke that same evening. That was one day. That was yesterday. The morning after the fire came down, Elijah got a message from Jezebel. One sentence: "By this time tomorrow, you will be dead, just like I killed those prophets." And the man who had just stood against 850 false prophets ran. Not a short run. He ran all the way to Beersheba, south, as far from Jezebel as he could get. He left his servant there, alone. That detail tells you everything about his state of mind. He didn't want company, he didn't want witnesses, he didn't want to be known. He walked another full day into the wilderness, alone, until he found a small desert shrub. The Hebrew word is rotham, what some Bibles call a juniper tree, actually more of a broom bush. Sparse branches, thin leaves. In the desert heat, it gave almost no shade at all. But it was what he had. And under it, Elijah sat down and asked God to let him die. "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life. I am not better than my fathers." He was done. Completely. The man who stood on a mountain and called fire from heaven was sitting in the desert under a shrub asking God to end it. How does this happen? Here's the thing nobody teaches. Elijah didn't crash at his lowest point. He crashed at his highest. The day after the fire, the morning after the miracle, the dawn after the whole nation fell on their faces. This is not a coincidence. There's a pattern in scripture and in human experience. The highest spiritual highs are often followed by the deepest crashes. Think about what his body had been through. He had run 16 miles from Mount Carmel to the city of Jezreel that very evening. 16 miles after an all-day confrontation, after the emotional intensity of calling fire from heaven, after the execution of 850 prophets, then immediately a threat. A run south, days of travel. He was physically shattered, and when the body is empty, so is everything else. Spiritually, emotionally, mentally. One threat from one woman collapsed everything. Not because Elijah was weak, because exhaustion makes even small things feel unsurvivable. And here's what the text records that almost nobody notices. Jezebel didn't come after him. She sent the message, just words on a messenger's lips. She didn't send soldiers, she didn't mobilize the army. She didn't make a move. She sent a threat. And it worked. Because Elijah wasn't running from what Jezebel had done. He was running from what he imagined she would do. Exhaustion doesn't just drain your body, it fuels your imagination. And the imagination of an exhausted person is never kind. What he said under the tree. I am not better than my fathers. That line. Most people skip it, but it tells you exactly where Elijah's mind was. His fathers, the prophets before him, had tried to bring Israel back to God for generations and failed. Elijah was saying, I've done everything. I called fire from the sky. I've given everything I have, and nothing has actually changed. Jezebel is still queen. Israel is still broken. I haven't done anything that any prophet before me could do. I am not better than my fathers. That's not just exhaustion talking. That's a man who poured out everything he had and watched it seemingly amount to nothing. That's the bitterest kind of burnout. Not failure after no effort, but what feels like failure after total commitment, when you gave everything and it still wasn't enough. The first response. This is where everything turns. Pay very close attention to what God did not do. He did not correct Elijah. He didn't rebuke him for running. He didn't give him a vision or a new assignment or an inspiring word. He sent an angel, and the angel didn't speak first. He touched him. The Hebrew word for touch here is nagah. It's a gentle contact, a hand placed on a shoulder, a presence felt before it is heard, physical, personal, immediate, before one word was spoken. Then, arise and eat. Elijah looked around. Bread baked on hot coals, a jar of water. He ate, he drank, and he went back to sleep. The angel came a second time, touched him again, and this time the words were different. Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you. Not because you have more work to do, not because God needs you, not because you shouldn't feel this way, because the journey is too great for you. God acknowledged the weight before he asked Elijah to carry it again. Read that one more time. God's first response to the burned out prophet was not a sermon, not a correction, not a command to perform. Food, rest, a touch, and then the same food and rest again. Because once wasn't enough. This is not a small thing. This is the God of the universe saying, I see your body. I see your exhaustion. I'm not asking you to pretend it isn't real. Eat. 40 days. Strengthened by that food, Elijah walked 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. That number is not accidental. 40 days in the wilderness, the same length Moses spent on Sinai receiving the law. The same length Israel wandered in the desert for 1 year's worth of sin, and the mountain itself. This was a place where God had spoken to Moses from a burning bush, where the law was given, where Israel was formed as a nation. Elijah didn't just run somewhere, he ran to the one place on earth where God had most clearly and most dramatically shown up. He found the cave, crawled inside, and spent the night. Scholars have noted something remarkable about the original Hebrew of this verse. The text doesn't say a cave, it says the cave, with a definite article. In a mountain with many caves, why the? Why specific? Some scholars believe this was the same cleft in the rock where Moses had stood when God passed by in Exodus 33. The same crack in the same mountain where Moses had hidden his face while the glory of God passed over. If that's right, Elijah was in the exact same spot. The most burned out prophet in Israel, hiding in the very place where God had shown up most personally to the greatest prophet who came before him. He may not have known that, but God did. Right here, drop a comment. Be honest. Have you ever been in a cave? Not this cave, but that place. That place of, I gave everything I had and I'm not sure it mattered. I'm done. I'm alone. I have nothing left. Tell me below. I read every single one. And if this kind of teaching, going all the way into the original language and the historical world of the text, is what you've been looking for, subscribe right now. This is what we do here. Every video, every week. Okay, let's finish this. What are you doing here? God spoke. What are you doing here, Elijah? That question carries more weight than it sounds. God knew exactly where Elijah was. God knew exactly why. The question wasn't confusion. It wasn't accusation. It was an invitation to say it out loud. Elijah answered, I have been very zealous for you, Lord. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, killed your prophets. I am the only one left. And now they are trying to kill me too. I am the only one left. That line right there. That is what exhaustion tells you. You are alone. Nobody else is fighting. Nobody else understands. Nobody else is carrying this. It is all on you, and you are the only one, and even you are almost gone. That belief in that moment felt completely true to Elijah. He was wrong, but we'll get to that. First, God told him to stand on the mountain, and then something extraordinary happened. Wind, earthquake, fire. 3 things came. First, a wind so powerful it split mountains and shattered rocks, but God was not in the wind. Then, an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. Then, fire, but God was not in the fire. Stop here because this is specific to Elijah in a way that most readings miss. Elijah was the prophet of fire. God had just shown up for him as fire on Mount Carmel, the most dramatic, visible, powerful display of God's presence in a generation. Fire was Elijah's language. Fire was a signature moment of his ministry. And now God was standing right in front of him on this mountain saying, I am not in the fire. Not this time. Why? Because God was showing Elijah something he needed to learn. Your ministry will not always look like Mount Carmel. The spectacular is not where I always live. You cannot make me show up in fire every time you need me to. You cannot build your whole life around the dramatic moment, around the supernatural display, around the thing that proves it beyond all doubt. Because in the long middle of the journey, in the quiet years and the invisible seasons, and the times when nothing spectacular is happening, I am still here, and I am going to show you how I show up there. The thin silence. After the fire, something else. The Hebrew is kol de mama daka. Every translation struggles with this phrase. The Old King James says a still, small voice. The NIV says a gentle whisper. The ESV says a low whisper. But the literal Hebrew is stranger and more beautiful. Kol, sound or voice. De mama, silence, calm, stillness. Daka, thin, small, fine. A sound of thin silence, the sound of sheer stillness. Not a whisper, something quieter than a whisper, something paradoxical, a voice inside silence, a communication so faint that it can only be received by someone who has completely stopped. And when Elijah heard it, the text says he wrapped his cloak around his face and went and stood at the mouth of the cave. He wrapped his face, like Moses had hidden his face. He knew. In the wind, he had not found God. In the earthquake, he had not found God. In the fire, his own element, his own language, he had not found God. And then, in the silence, in the quiet, no louder than a breath, that's where God was. This is one of the most important things in the entire story. God will not always show up the way he showed up last time. And if you are waiting for the fire every time, you will miss him in the silence every time. The same question. The same answer. God asked again, the exact same question, what are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah gave the exact same answer he had given before. Word for word, identical. I have been zealous. The covenant has been broken. The altars are gone. The prophets are dead. I am the only one left, and they are trying to kill me. He hadn't moved emotionally at all. The wind hadn't changed him. The earthquake hadn't changed him. The fire hadn't changed him. Even the thin silence hadn't changed his assessment of his situation. He still believed the lie. And God didn't argue with him. He corrected him, quietly, directly, with a number. I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal. 7,000. Not one, not a few scattered individuals. 7,000 people who had stayed faithful, who had not bowed, who had not kissed the idol, who were holding on, quietly, invisibly, alone, in the same broken kingdom. Elijah didn't know about a single one of them, not one. That is what the cave does to you. When you are in the cave, your perspective collapses down to the size of the cave. You can only see what is immediately around you. And what is immediately around you is stone walls and darkness and your own exhausted breathing. The 7,000 were always out there, in the same drought, in the same silence, under the same regime, holding on. They just couldn't reach Elijah in the cave, and Elijah couldn't see them from inside it. Here's what God did next. He didn't retire Elijah. Didn't say, "You've done enough, you can rest now." Didn't send him somewhere quiet to recover indefinitely. He gave him 3 names: Hazael, king to be anointed over Aram; Jehu, king to be anointed over Israel; Elisha, prophet to take Elijah's place. 3 new assignments, new people to find, new work to begin. And one of them, Elisha, would walk with Elijah, be trained by him, carry his mantle. God wasn't just sending Elijah back to work, he was sending Elijah back with a companion. He answered the "I'm the only one left," not just with a number, but with a person. Go find Elisha. You will not be alone. This is the God who showed up under the Rotham tree. He didn't wait for Elijah to pull himself together. He didn't wait until Elijah's faith looked strong again. He didn't demand performance before provision. He fed him first, let him sleep, fed him again, acknowledged the journey was too great, and then, only then, showed him the next step. 1 step, not 100. Go anoint 3 people. That's it. Start there. And Elijah went. He found Elisha plowing a field. Ordinary work, nothing spectacular about it. And Elijah threw his cloak over Elisha's shoulders, and Elisha left everything and followed. The man who had sat under a desert bush and asked God to end his life was now mentoring the next generation. Not because Elijah got over it quickly, but because God met him exactly where he was and gave him just enough to take the next step. One more thing. Here is the ending of Elijah's story. Not 1 Kings 19, the actual ending. It's in 2 Kings 2. Elijah never died. He was walking with Elisha one day, and a chariot of fire appeared, and horses of fire, and Elijah went up in a whirlwind into heaven. The man who sat under a desert bush and asked God to end his life never experienced death. God took him home in a chariot. That is not a small detail. The man most ready to quit had the most extraordinary exit in all of Scripture. This is what happens when you let God meet you where you are instead of running from where you are. You don't know what God is preparing you for. Elijah didn't know. He just knew he couldn't take another step. And God said, "You don't have to. Eat. Rest. The journey is too great for you. I know that. I've always known that. That's why I'm here." Here's what this actually means. You came into this thinking Elijah was a superhero of faith, unshakable, a man of fire, someone unlike you. And he was a man who called fire from heaven. That's true. He was also a man who sat under a desert bush and asked God to end his life the day after the fire fell. And God's first response was not a sermon. It was a touch. It was bread on hot coals, a jar of water, and a sentence that changes everything. The journey is too great for you. Not, you're weak and need to do better. The journey is too great for you. God built the acknowledgement into the provision. I know it's too much. I'm not pretending it isn't. I'm not asking you to pretend it isn't. Eat, rest, and understand you are not the only one left. You can't see them from where you are right now, but there are 7,000 people holding on in the same silence you're sitting in, and God has not forgotten a single one of them. He hasn't forgotten you either. If you are under your juniper tree right now, if you gave everything and feel like it amounted to nothing, if the victory came and went and left you more exhausted than before, the angel is already there. The bread is already baked. And the God who sent fire on a mountain is the same God who shows up in the thin silence, in the place so quiet most people don't even know to look. Arise and eat. The journey is too great. He knows, and he's not going anywhere.